Good morning, it is Dominic, Steele, and it's the 4th of January 2023, Daily Bible Time this morning, and we're up to Chapter 8, the chapter on Babel, Judgement and Pride, working through Christopher Watkin's new book out, Biblical Critical Theory, and it's a shorter chapter, a little bit of a simpler chapter, but very interesting as he digs into this whole area of, the two cities from Augustine. And so let's just give you the questions from the end of the chapter, the three or four questions. In the Babel narrative, what is the desire to make a name for ourselves, and why is it met with God's condemnation and scattering? Think of an example from our own culture of making a name for ourselves. To what burdens and problems does it give rise? Immediately we think social media. Point 4, or question, the next one, what are the great spectacles of our own society through which we find our meaning, and what is the relationship laid out in this chapter between God's judgment and the meaning of life? Now, we go to the Tower of Babel, Genesis chapter 11. It's a story of autonomy. The events of Babel presented in two acts, the people's provocation and God's response. The story of Genesis 11, 1-4, the whole world had one language, a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used bricks instead of stone and tar for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth." Genesis 11, 1-4. Now, Watkin observes there are 5 clues in this first act of Genesis 11 that show that the people's main intention is not primarily to establish a stable city. Well, let me just read them to you from Watkin's book. 1, the first humans were commanded by God in Genesis 1:28 to fill the earth. Here they want to build a city lest they're scattered. Direct violation of God's command. And people want to assert their own autonomous identity, captured in the language that we might make a name for ourselves. And yet in biblical thinking, to name something is to have authority over it. In Genesis 1, God systematically names the elements of creation as he makes them, and commensurate with the mandate for humanity to have dominion under God, Adam names the animals. To seek to make a name for oneself is to assert one's self-made autonomous independence, to claim once more to be master of my fate, the captain of my soul, to ignore the one who gives you life, breath and everything. Next up, they want to make a name for themselves by building a tower that reaches to the heavens. There are 2 ways of interpreting this architectural undertaking. One is that the tower is a bridge or a portal between heaven and earth, that it's designed to make it convenient for the God to come down to his temple, receive worship, bless his people. The second interpretation sees the tower as a beachhead for launching an assault on God's throne room. A proud assertion of autonomous technological capability on the part of a culture that's turned its back on God. I think it's more likely to be the second one. 4th one, in narrative terms, rather than playing a role in God's story, filling the earth and subduing it, these people want God to play a supporting role in their story as the heavenly antagonist who is ultimately beholden to, vanquished through their heroic self-aggrandizement. And then the 5th point, there may also be an echo in the "come let us make" of God's "let us make" in Genesis 1:26, suggesting that the people are usurping a God-like role. Now, the narrative, says Watkin, of Genesis 11 bears an amazing resemblance to Genesis 3. It's basically the same project that humanity seeks to fulfill in the 2 chapters, to make ourselves equal with God and thereby gain autonomy. And so the project of Babel it's neither humanitarian nor philanthropic. Babel is the beginning of 2 different sorts of globalization. A globalization of dominion or domination. The result is not the common good, but the domination of some, the powerful, over others. Then, second half of the chapter, or second half of the Tower Building Act, the initiative switches to God. The Lord comes down. God, of course, doesn't need to come down, and there's irony in that statement. The motive of descent, or motif of descent, is intended to parody the heaven-storming aspirations of humanity. And then the Lord decrees that if as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible. Let's go down, confuse their language so they won't understand each other. Now, Sometimes this has been understood as a spiteful move to keep humans divided and dumb, but in fact it is God's mercy. God's not against the technology, he's against sin, and the proposed tower is the headquarters of autonomous human sinfulness, so the Lord scatters them. Now, you see the same sort of thing happen with Nebuchadnezzar. In Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar encapsulates the spirit of Babel. Is this not the great Babylon that I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty? Daniel 4:30. And then God brings him down in the same way. Now, what about today? Well, we do have still this propensity to want to make a name for ourselves. Success in life is seen as the individual's responsibility alone. If somebody's not supremely successful, they're at fault. The only thing stopping us from following our dreams is our lack of desire. That's the spirit of Babel. Or Babel as a spectacle. New section heading for Watkin. The architects and tradespeople of Genesis 1, they don't simply build a city, but they put it at the centre of this great tower. Their reputation is going to be mediated through technology. They will be the people with the highest tower in the world, and the tower will be a spectacular symbol of their power. Their performances showing off my power. Now, Watkin points us to grand building projects like French President Francois Mitterrand's projects, including the glass pyramid in the courtyard of the Louvre. But this spectacle, wanting people to look at me and be impressed by me. When we get to, immediately we're thinking social media. When we get to the heading Babel, Judgment and Meaning, it is tempting, says Watkin, for a would-be autonomous humanity to imagine there's no final accounting, no divine judgment on human actions. He has a telling story from Schindler's List, where the Nazi soldiers behave as if no one's watching. In the book and in the movie, there's a little girl dressed in red who is watching, but they behave as if she will die and they will be unaccountable, and so that they can kill with impunity. And yet her presence there in the book and her presence in the movie, well, to give you the paragraph, whatever else the Flood and Babel narratives teach, they affirm that every human action has a witness, and that this witness is also the judge of every human action. The consequence of this ever-present testimony, as the soldiers in Schindler's Ark seem to recognise, is that everything matters, nothing is waved through. The judgment of God means we do not live in a meaningless or inconsequential universe, where what counts is not what we do, but whether we get caught. Such a universe privileges the rich over the poor, the cunning over the honest, those who can evade capture over those who can respect justice, those who can afford the best lawyers over those who cannot, those who live in one legal and cultural system over those who live in another. It is not the sort of world we want to live in. Or to cut a little closer to the bone, it's not the sort of the world we want everyone around us to live in, although we might secretly enjoy the prospect ourselves. We then get to the heading Two Cities, and here we see Watkin's love of Augustine's Two Cities narrative. From Genesis 3 onwards, there have existed in the world what Augustine famously called two cities, the city of God and the earthly city. He distinguishes between the cities not in terms of distinct geographical locations, nor in terms of higher spiritual and lower earthly realities, but in terms of two loves. The greatest love of the heavenly city is the love of God, and the greatest love of the earthly city is the love of self. Both cities also shape their citizens to love and desire in certain ways. The two cities are governed by two stories. The city of God moves to the rhythm of creation, fall, redemption, to that narrative of the Bible. The earthly city, variegated in its expressions of autonomous self-reliance, dances over time to the beat of many drums, including the form-matter distinction of the Greeks, the nature-freedom dichotomy of our own modernity. Each story has, in David Bentley Hart's terms, its own grammar, its own set of figures, categories, habits, and values. It's the grammar of the two cities, these fundamental figures for understanding the world, that Watkin seeks to make visible. The two cities remain intermingled and in conversation with each other through the rest of the Bible until the very end, when they're separated at final judgment. And there is a sense in which each of us lives in one and only one of these cities now, and a sense in which Christians live in both, depending on how the city language is used. It's a very stimulating chapter. Thanks for joining us on Daily Bible Time today. We turn tomorrow to Abraham and promise in chapter 9 of Watkin's book. God bless.